Loyal showstopper Crawford is used to being the best. As a pilot in the Empire State's privately run air militia, and an ace pilot and leader of the vaunted Madison Venturers, Crawford is used to being privileged with both the perks of high society status, given his family's stated wealth, and the perks of being the Empire State's most politically important instrument of state defense. Crawford commands a squadron of pilots who seem both as wealthy and as skilled as he is, and his squadron's aircraft are maintained by the most proficient maintenance personnel and operations money can buy. Their position is such that they receive orders directly from their president, who, as civilian leader of the Empire State and commander-in-chief of their national armed forces, expects the Broadway bombers to deliver on their orders, without deviation. Despite the curious case that the Madison Venturers Squadron are not a unit of the National Armed Forces, but essentially private military contractors in the government's employ. This becomes a relevant context when, in the hook of the story, the squadron's attempt to apprehend an airborne pirate during a dogfight goes awry, and through a great coincidence, Crawford's radio catches the frequency where a mole within the squadron is giving away their mission to the pirates, allowing them to thwart the plan. In a bid to save his squadron, Crawford explicitly goes against orders, attacking the pirates' base, catching their fighters off guard, and allowing his squadron to survive the mission intact. But saving his squadron from destruction is apparently not a good enough reason to go against presidential orders. Not simply orders down the military chain of command, but orders straight from the president himself. It's apparently so bad that rather than trusting the testimony of their premier squadron's leader and attempting an investigation that might uncover such a deadly weakness as a mole within the squadron, there was no communication other than seeking punishment for Crawford's apparent insubordination. Things get worse for Crawford when he is lured to the squadron hangar alone, hoping to find a friend to help him, but instead is ambushed, drugged, and propped up in his airplane and set up to take the fall for an airborne attack that he himself could not have committed, but that someone did using his airplane. As per convention for a story of a character falsely accused, having to escape incarceration in order to go and clear their name, the trial, despite having the trappings of a fair trial, is a speedy miscarriage of justice, and not just as expedient for the story to unfold. If you experience television like I did, then the tropes and format of police procedurals come to mind. If a case seems wrapped up, but there's still time on the clock, it means there's a twist in the case, whether in evidence or interpretation thereof, that invariably exposes a deeper truth that better fits evidence before the heroes get the real perpetrator. Thusly, the whole setup for Crawford's adventure to clear his name by itself gets my attention. The investigation that should have gathered evidence for the trial apparently stopped at finding an inebriated Crawford in the cockpit of his airplane, late of an attack, and deciding that no one else could have possibly flown his aircraft to commit the crime. Any detective actually interested in investigating should not have been satisfied with Crawford as the only suspect. As far as we know, every member of the squadron had access to every aircraft in the hangar when Crawford's plane was taken and used in the crime. Establishing who was where in the facility before, during, and after the attack should have been a first priority, for example. Not only that, but the maintenance record concerning Crawford's damaged radio should have been examined in light of Crawford's testimony concerning his violation of presidential orders. Instead of an expansive investigation into the incident and crime concerning the Empire State's highest-placed squadron and its leader, it and the trial that follows focus exclusively on the character of Crawford as defendant, not when any possible means, motive, and opportunity can be narrowed down by the evidence at hand. Because Crawford is known to indulge in alcohol, supposedly act on his own, and has a more than passing acquaintance with a privateer of the Empire State, the case is made that Crawford would go renegade, flagrantly disobey presidential orders, attack the citizenry, and all to supposedly turn pirate. Despite being a figure at the center of enforcing law and order in the skies of the Empire State, Crawford himself shows a distinct lack of working legal knowledge as concerns his rights and conduct as an air militia pilot. It's all the more jarring that, as he is technically an employee of his uncle's private security firm serving state interests, acquiring legal representation during the investigation and trial should have been first and foremost a priority, and a trifling price concerning the company's and his uncle's stated wealth. Without representation, Crawford is left to fend for himself against whatever powers are afforded police investigators to get desirable results. Not necessarily the truth or a new lead for the crime, but a speedy conclusion to an apparent embarrassment of a case. An embarrassment of a pilot to the air militia, the state, and presumably the president personally. What makes the situation for both Crawford and the Broadway bombers worse is that when Crawford receives the message as lure that gets him into further trouble, he had more options than just biting. He might have tried discreetly confiding in his female squadron mates. He is only certain that the mole is male. Or taking the message to his wing commander as evidence of an unknown party acting suspiciously. Instead of exposing himself by discreetly offering himself as a patsy to the traitor, fit for taking the fall, he could have kept himself in view of any one of his colleagues, or trusted officials or security, as witnesses to his honest investigations and actions. A criminal like the traitor would depend on their target keeping themselves alone, isolated, and under suspicion in order to incapacitate and use them to cover their tracks. Without a great depth of knowledge in law and the practice thereof, such where Crawford and yours truly find themselves, the tool we're left with boils down to social deduction. To understand who has what knowledge or supposition, manipulate it, and wait for the response. In this game of social deduction, interpreting the responses helps indicate the different parties' incentives, and thus motives. For example, typical of the Crimson Skies, you have air piracy that loses you an airship and cargo on a route. Information on what airships carry what cargo going on which route is shared among a group of people, so you don't initially know who is the mole. The game of social deduction, where you try to find who might be feeding information to pirates, involves controlling what knowledge the other parties receive. But what they think is knowledge common to all parties, the one giving the information knows each is distinct from all the others. Depending on what information is acted on by the pirates, working backwards shows who the mole is. This trope is called feeding the mole, or more classically, the canary trap. To fully explore the problem probably demands a separate entry in the form of a fun riddle to solve. For the story, however, Crawford is framed for treason, fakes his death, searches for the traitor, and gets stuck in hostile territory, going nowhere fast. He nearly gets taken down when he happens across Nathan Zachary, enjoying a quiet evening dinner, until Crawford's adventure calls to him. Despite how little the two men know each other, Crawford's plight convinces Zachary to help him, playing the Good Samaritan and in a more fundamental way as Crawford finds by the end. After a gamble for information, coming across a woman murdered, and tracing her killer to their accomplices, and many scrapes with pirates along the way, Crawford eventually gets the information he needs to clear his name, and learns how he owes his salvation to Zachary, the pirate. Like his previous experience with the Black Swan, which is its own story as well, Crawford has to come to terms with the fact that the best person he could come across to help him was a pirate, a categorically sworn enemy of his Empire State, and a good man. Nathan Zachary, the pirate, has no obligation to uphold any ideology from any nation-state, not empire nor industrial state. Neither is he obligated to hunt down someone down on their luck and targeted for death, even if they're a sworn enemy of pirates, like Air Militia pilot Loyal Crawford. At the end, all he asks of Crawford is a favor that he may collect on at some point in the future. Anyone who plays the PC game Crimson Skies actually hears a reference of Crawford paying back on his debt to Zachary, when the player gets a mission briefing of Zachary and the Fortune Hunters being warned of a pirate hunting operation specifically targeting them. Meanwhile, finding the real traitor forces Crawford to confront his own culture of elite status that induces ostensible team players to think, when the going gets tough, to face it alone. When Crawford faced suspicion for going against orders and couldn't immediately prove the presence of a traitor, Crawford did not confide in anyone, and was an easy target for a setup to a violent crime. It was apparently so easy that the suspicions of everyone around him did most of the work already. Meanwhile, the traitor Hawthorne got in trouble with gambling, and instead of confiding in anyone to help, turned to stealing to pay off the debt, but was caught and then blackmailed into betraying their squadron and then framing Crawford. On account of their pride that they were the richest, most accomplished, most infallible people in their high society world, and an elite among fighter pilots, a little failure and solid application of blackmail proved them wrong in the most ego-shattering ways possible. As easily as Crawford was dismissed from the Air Militia, dismissed from his family's private security company, and stripped of his honor, so too was the traitor Hawthorne arrested, tried, and sentenced as easily as Crawford was. So too was he disowned from his family and his place in high society, and with little chance to find a friend like Crawford found in Nathan Zachary. If the traitor Hawthorne ever found freedom again, not even the pirates he served might take him back, and all on account of some illegal racing bets. So what should we make of a state and society that so easily tosses aside its most privileged and presumably most accomplished defenders of their sky? I personally find it a little hard to believe that the yellow journalism of tabloids or print media would have the greatest leverage over the highest offices of the Empire State's political and military institutions. As scandalous as it seemed to defy presidential orders, even to save the lives of the squadron, and as heinous as the attack on civilians was, if there was any reasonable doubt that Crawford was solely responsible for the mission's failure, and especially doubt that he committed the attack, the powers that be should have been incentivized to find the whole truth before acting rashly, and then being discredited when new information came to light, such as the accused procuring evidence to exonerate themselves, when it shouldn't have been their job in the first place. Indeed, Crawford returns with the evidence, is exonerated, and the president gets egg on his face for being so quick to have Crawford tried and sentenced. Even the military command and his company executive uncle have to admit how wrong they were and seem keen to make corrections. In the first place, it was the state military that wanted Crawford sacked for the mission failure, and his uncle, supposedly with pressure by his company board members, that quickly cut him off from his company. Supposing that Crawford was culpable all along, and the president, military, and Crawford's uncle's company was right to let him go, just what would have been their plan to make up for the loss? The elite Madison Venturers squadron need another replacement pilot, one that makes the cut to fill in for Crawford's experience and proficiency, and they need time to re-establish trust amongst themselves in order to best do their job. On top of that, for how big a scandal was made of their previous failures, the Air Militia would need time to re-establish trust with the general public in order to maintain support they need to continue fighting off pirates, especially those sponsored by their great rival, the industrial states of America. After all, those flawless aircraft repairs don't come cheap. Nevertheless, the same fundamental problem with the Air Militia will remain, especially as it's run now, that it's privately run by the wealthiest members of society. For all their wealth and presumed prestige, any prospective pilots for the Broadway bombers not only have to be a valued member of high society, if wealthy board members as shareholders are any indication, they also have to be above suspicion in their conduct in the eyes of apparently fickle superiors. On top of that, with a print media landscape that prioritizes scandalous yellow journalism over deeper, more substantive investigation, it's apparently very easy to lose favor with the reading public. As good a performance that may be given by a prospective golden boy of the air militia, if it takes only a little targeted scheming and blackmail to convince that pilot to turn traitor, and the culture tells them that they should have no one to turn to, then the Empire State, the Broadway bombers, and that unfortunate pilot may be in for the same sad ride all over again. If Loyal Crawford, the hero of our story, didn't find help in the pirate Nathan Zachary to expose the real traitor, then some other poor soul may become another mark for enemies of the Empire State, using the members of elite high society and their own fickleness against them. If anything can be learned from this adventure, I think it pays not to be too proud for self-examination, and not too quick to deny some benefit of the doubt where one's ignorance is concerned, and that being high and mighty definitely requires a stable foundation of well-earned trust.